Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we're talking about a series near and dear to our dear friend Tyler's heart, Persona.
That is correct. And I know you have a little bit of experience with Persona because we played it a little bit together when you
I watched you
lived
play
out
it.
here. You watched?
That's
yeah.
where Hot Pot brings everyone together. That's why I learned that.
We got a friend meme out of that one.
We
Hot
did.
Pot
We
brings
really
everyone
did.
together,
It's important.
which is true.
It's true.
So yeah, one of these days I want to play one of these with you, like play it on stream or Discord or something, like where because we've done that a few times where we play something together, or at least have somebody else playing something while other people do stuff in the background or something like that. So I would love to do that. Maybe with Persona 3 Reload comes out next month.
Ooh,
really excited for that.
I'd try it. Yeah.
I'm so excited. Also, it's on Game Pass, so you can even play it yourself.
It's like they're giving it away.
That's
you might
right.
as well do it.
Yeah. So I'm super stoked for Persona 3 Reload. And in my mind, the Persona series is really the only JRPG series that rivals Final Fantasy. That's my opinion. Everybody can have their own opinions. That's fine. You can tell me why I'm wrong. I don't care.
We're putting this stuff up on the internet now, so you might get some hot takes coming at you with that. But you know what? Tyler doesn't even read the comments anyway. You hear that, internet? Tyler's not even looking at you. So there.
Never read the comments. That's what they say, right?
That's what they say. And honestly, as someone who's been reading the comments for the last week of trying to push hard on social media, you shouldn't read the comments.
I haven't read any comments on anything that you've pushed on social media.
Well, we posted a Starfield video, and it got a lot of opinions.
I like it. It doesn't bother me when people have like say mean things or whatever, because it's engagement, baby.
It's engagement. That's the funny part about it too, is I don't think in the clip that was chosen because really gave people my true opinion, because my true opinion of Starfield is it's fine. That's okay.
It's fine.
Fine game. I had a fun time playing it. There are parts of it that I wish were a little more fleshed out, and that's just the way it is for me, but I still enjoyed it. So
yeah, game is fine. There are people out there who wanted it to be the greatest game they've ever played, and so they made it that in their minds, and that's fine. And then they get mad when other people don't think that. And you know what? It's video games. We can have different opinions. It's okay.
That's right.
If you love Starfield, that's fine. I'm not saying you're wrong or dumb.
Yeah, we're not saying you're dumb. We're saying everything's fine.
What I am saying is that Persona is the second best JRPG franchise, except for Final Fantasy, and that's a fact, not an opinion.
That's right. There it is. All right. I'm excited to talk about this. You told me you were doing Persona, and I was really stoked because, yeah, besides watching you play some Persona 5, I don't know anything, and I'm excited to learn some.
I kind of knew that it's a big rabbit hole that you can dive into when I started doing this, and I was like, we're going to start with Persona because that's the series that I know. I really have like personal experience with the games from 3 and beyond. I've spent a lot of time with all 3 of those games. The first 2 I have less experience with. We'll talk about the first one today, but yeah, it's the Persona series itself is kind of a deep dive, and then it's actually a sub-series of a larger series, which itself is a sub-series of a larger series. It's a whole thing. And
really?
There's like spin-offs on spin-offs. Yeah. Oh, this is an Inception level. Like the spin-offs go deep.
Wow. I'm excited. I'm even more excited now to get into it with you.
Yeah. So I think the Persona series is one that maintains consistency while also providing something new in every entry. In that way, I actually think of it as more similar to Pokemon than like Final Fantasy, because Final Fantasy has some similar themes and like some things that sort of are similar between games, but ultimately every game is like very different. They take place in different universes. Like it's a whole, they're super, super different. I think Persona is more similar to Pokemon, and there are other gameplay reasons it's more similar to Pokemon, but I mean, in its consistency and themes, like the Pokemon games all take place in the same universe, right? Every game sort of does something a little different, but you do know what you're getting when you go into it, right? You know, you're going to be getting gym badges. You know, you're going to be fighting Pokemon. You know, there's going to be a bunch of new Pokemon, and you know generally how that's going to work. You know how the type weaknesses and strengths and stuff like that all work, right? You
only
know
those
what you're getting.
Small changes, like in Violet and Scarlet, you're making sandwiches. That's the other thing you're doing, which is kind of fun.
True. But yeah, Persona games are kind of all the same. They all take place in a high school in Japan. You're always the new guy. For the most part, combat is done in a turn-based classic JRPG fashion with entities known as personas. That's why it's kind of like Pokemon, because the personas are sort of like Pokemon that you can like capture, and they're different, but similar idea. So I want to adapt Grime facts here for the entire Persona series.
We're switching it up.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
So the developer is primarily Atlas. It also is published by Atlas. You'll see Sega all over things because Sega owns Atlas. So you kind of see the logo on stuff.
Atlas, but more known for the hit series Snowboard Kids than Persona, right? Obviously.
Character Jack Frost in Snowboard Kids, the little snowman guy,
Mm-hmm.
a Persona. And I don't know if he's in every Persona game, but he's certainly in 3, 4, and 5.
Well, now I'm extremely invested. You've
Yeah,
done it for me. You've
yeah.
really done it for me.
So and there's a few different. There's Jack Frost. There's Jack O'Lantern, which is like sort of a fiery version of Jack Frost. There's Black Frost, which is Jack Frost, but his whole body is black and like he has a purple hat and stuff. And I always aspire to get Black Frost, but it's usually like a long, involved process to get him, and so I don't think I've ever gotten him.
Is he the Wario to Jack Frost's Mario in a way?
Maybe.
Like,
I
are they
don't
supposed
know.
to be opposites?
I don't think so. I think he's supposed to be superior to Jack Frost because usually you have to fuse Jack Frost and various other things. Usually Jack Frost is part of that, and Jack O'Lantern also.
Fusing involved.
There's fusing involved. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure we're gonna get there.
We'll get there.
I'll just sit down for now. This is gonna get crazy, so I gotta back up. I gotta let you go through it. Okay.
I'm not gonna go deep on like the fusion system because to be honest, I don't really know how it works. And it gets real complicated. I think at Persona 4 you can do like 12-way fusions. And I almost never do that stuff in these games because I can usually make it to the end without having to worry about any of that. But it goes deep if you want it to. So yeah. Anyway, back to the grind facts.
All right.
The release date of Revelations Persona, that's the first Persona game. It was published on September 20th, 1996 in Japan and December 14th of the same year in North America, which is pretty quick turnaround for Japanese games in the 90s. If you ask me, just a few months.
It's really fast.
I'm surprised this game came to North America or the West at all because it's just the subject matter and thematics to it are just like not something that they would have brought to the US in the 90s. I don't know. It was a different time, you know? You can play the whole series is primarily on the PlayStation. So there's the first 2 games are on PlayStation 1, 3 and 4 were originally for PlayStation 4. 5 was on PlayStation 3 and 4 at kind of the same time. And then I think there's also a PlayStation 5 version of Persona 5. But there's also usually some remakes. Most games have remakes on PSP or PS Vita, or I think Persona 5 is also on Xbox One. Everything's on Switch now, except I don't think the first 2 games are on Switch. And then, PS Vita had Persona 4 Golden, which was the best version of Persona 4 for a long time. Until it still is the best version of Persona 4. You used to only be able to play it on PS Vita, and now it's on everything. So that's fine. Number of copies sold. VG Charts has the whole series as shipping 19,710,000 units. So
it's a lot of units.
It's a lot of units for a series that's almost 30 years old. So I don't know how that compares, but you would want to compare it to to the things it's sort of competing with, other RPGs, probably other things in that niche, because it's never going to be a Call of Duty, right?
Yeah.
It probably sells more than that in the first hour that it exists. The main series are all what I would consider a Japanese RPG. They're all turn-based. The first game has some like tactical things going on too, with you can kind of reposition your characters. The average time to complete is about 30 to 50 hours for the first 2 games, and then Persona 2 has 2 parts, and each game is in that range.
Wow. So 2 parts, each one is worth 30 to 50 hours a piece?
Yeah.
That's a lot of game right there.
That's a lot of game. But it just goes up from there. 3 with the expansion is at, so if you're playing Persona 3 Fez, which has an expanded story like added onto it, that's 80 hours. Persona 4 is 72 hours. Persona 5 Royal, which is the expanded version of Persona 5, is 101 hours. I want to say it took me 90 to beat Persona 5. So I think Royal expansion adds on like 30 hours. So I will probably spend a lot more time.
Are you going to go back? Are you going to play Royal, you think?
I would really like to, because I never played Royal, actually. I only played Persona 5 Vanilla.
So if we play Persona 3 together, you're going to be sitting with me for 80 hours.
Yeah, dude. If we play
that's a friendship commitment right there.
Yeah. If we play The Answer, which is widely regarded as not very good. So we may not play that. It's like 30 extra hours, I think.
We might skip that part. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Metacritic score, I'm just going to give like sort of a general overview. They're generally pretty good. Recent entries scoring in the high 80s and 90s. I think Persona 5 is like widely regarded as like just a very, very good game. The older ones can get as low as the 70s, but they're all like pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And they get better as you go as well. The series is also known it is a spin-off itself of the Shin Megami Tensei series.
Mhm.
But it also has its own spin-offs. So there are fighting games. There's a couple of Persona 4 fighting games. There are some rhythm games. There's a Persona 3 rhythm game. There's a Persona 5 rhythm game. I think maybe a Persona 4 is in there somewhere. There are some dungeon crawler games. The Persona Q series. It's kind of sort of like dungeon crawly. So I'm mostly familiar with the main series, although I did play the spin-offs for 5, Strikers and Tactica,
You
which
liked Tactica. You
I
gave it a good
loved
review
Tactica.
last week. How did you
Yeah.
like Strikers?
I thought Strikers was fun. It's not really a genre that I'm like super into. I thought it was fun mostly because it was like Persona themed, but I'm not really into I don't know if you
Mhm.
ever played like the Dynasty Warriors games. That's
Yeah, that's
basically
like
what it is.
Hyrule Warriors is the same thing
Yeah.
for Zelda, right? Yeah, I'm not really. I haven't played that much at all, really. But
Yeah.
Dynasty Warriors, a historic series, we might want to talk about at some
We
point.
might.
So maybe we need to play it. We might need to play it for the podcast.
We might need to. Yeah.
Do it for
Or
the pod.
yeah. We might need to. There's a lot of those games too. And
There
they
are.
go back. I think they start on PS2. So there's like 10 of them or something, maybe more.
All right.
So anyway, but Strikers was fun. They took that gameplay and sort of put in a lot of Persona stuff to it, and I
Mhm.
enjoyed it. Um, but like I said, Mike, Persona itself is a spin-off of an even larger franchise. The lore deepens. So we won't talk too much about this. I would like to dive deeper into the parent series later, but for now we're
Had
gonna
you played the
stick to
parent
Persona.
series at all?
I've played Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. I played a little bit, like a very small amount of the original PS2 game, and I was like, this game is way too hard. And now it's been remastered like in the last few years, and I think it has an easier mode, so I may try that. Shin Megami Tensei 4 was on 3DS. That's pretty good, as I understand it. And then 5 is on Switch. That's a pretty relatively new game. So
Yeah.
I've been meaning to check those out, but I have not. But yeah, so the Persona series is a sub-series of Shin Megami Tensei, which is itself a spin-off of the Megami Tensei series. Um, there's only like a couple of Megami Tensei games. They sort of just morphed into the Shin Megami Tensei series, but I think technically it's a spin-off. In 1992, the first Shin Megami Tensei game came out. And the Megami Tensei games were like in 1990, I think.
So that's not
Or
that much of a difference. Like not a huge. It's not like going back to the 70s or 80s or anything. So
no,
it's
no,
yeah. Okay, good.
yeah. But the first Shin Megami Tensei game didn't come to the West until 2014 as like a smartphone, iOS, Android game, which is kind of wild to me. It was a Super Nintendo game, and there are fan translations online, I'm sure, if you want to go back and play it. It's a very wide-ranging series, like the Final Fantasy series, but it does thematically stay a bit more consistent. They're always focused on recruiting demons to fight with you. I'm not pretending to be an expert on the larger SMT series because I haven't really touched many of them, but I would like to cover them in a later episode. I would like to become an expert on them. Because like I said, 3 got a remake recently that has like an easy mode to it, which I'm bad at games, and so I need that.
We love an easy mode here. Everyone knows that. Old man gamers here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, me, not so much Tyler, but me. So I
Well,
need to.
especially when it comes to playing older games where you're like, when I play older games like that, like I get a little impatient too, where I'm like, I could be playing something newer.
Me
So it's like
too.
I want it on easy so that there aren't very many roadblocks in front of me. Like I'm not trying to like die and lose 2 hours of progress, which was like that substituted for being difficult in the early 2000s, right?
Mhm.
So
If
yeah,
the Star Wars Dark Forces remake is as hard as the original Star Wars Dark Forces, I'm probably not going to play it, to be
no,
honest, because
no,
I
I
don't want
need.
to put myself through that. I don't want to do that.
I put a couple hours into that game like a couple years ago.
I remember that you were talking to me
It's
about it
hard.
and how you get like lost and stuff
You
in it
get lost.
too.
It's like the original Doom games, only not like those games were a little bit more intuitive. Like you wandered around and found stuff, but it generally felt like you never got lost or stuck. Um, or if you did, it didn't last for very long. But Dark Forces, just I don't know, maybe it's just the way the levels are designed. Like I just felt like I got lost a lot more often.
Yeah, they
So
don't have like little visual cues to tell you where to go in the right way.
yeah, or it's just not intuitive. I think
Yeah.
Doom is really good at making you feel like you figured out the solution while they really just like sort of cleverly placed it right in
Yeah.
front of you.
They're like, hey, just follow this path.
Yeah. But yeah. So the SMT series is a little bit more spooky, a little bit more adult than the Persona series. Because Persona series deals with high schoolers, which is there's serious material in there, like very serious topics. But like they are less demonic and like
Mhm.
a cult. Though that stuff is still in there. I don't get me wrong. But like the SMT series gets a little bit more spooky
Oh,
and
wow. It's like more True Detective like in the first.
yeah.
It's like
So it
season 1 of True Detective.
yeah. Only all the games are good, I hope, because later seasons of True
Yeah,
Detective were
I
not
just said
good.
season 1. I'm just
Yeah.
season 1. We're not talking about season 2 of True Detective.
Yeah. But like I said, I haven't put a lot of time into those games, so I'm not trying to pretend to be an expert on them. If I've said anything that's incorrect, you can correct me. That's fine. I don't care. Um, but for the Persona series, there are a lot of elements in common between all of them. They all deal with characters sort of overcoming their like internal weaknesses and unleashing their personas, which are usually characters from different mythologies. Each game kind of has a different mythology that they'll pull from, and with some overlap between them as well. So like when you play Persona games, if you've played more than one of them, you'll go, oh yeah, I remember. Like I said, Jack Frost is in all of them. I don't know what
Mhm.
mythology that pulls from. The Atlas mythology, the
The
Snowboard Kids
claymation.
mythology.
Oh man, the Snowboard Kids lore goes deep. Everyone knows that. It's
Yeah, the
it's pulling
Snowboard Kids.
it's pulling specifically from the claymation Christmas movie and like mythology, I think.
Yeah. So most of the main story takes place in modern day Japan. These personas fight for the characters in an alternate reality. There's always like an alternate reality going on here. It's not the same alternate reality in each game. Each game has kind of its own alternate reality. But like the main reality that they take place in is always modern day Japan, and they do take place in the same universe, with not very much crossover in stories. Like they take place at high schools in different parts of Japan.
In the
Um,
same universe though.
in the same universe. Like in Persona 4, you do travel back to the high school that's in Persona 3 for a part of the story,
Oh, that's kind of cool.
um, which is kind of cool. Yeah. So there is like those characters all exist sort of in the same world, right? But they don't really interact. Which is why
Gotcha.
it's not weird when they make like crossover games that crossover like 3 and 4 or 3, 4, and 5 for like the fighting games or the rhythm games or stuff like that. Not that it matters. Like Smash Bros is fine. We don't like cry about how Wario and Kirby are in the same universe or whatever.
Link and Captain Falcon would never meet. No one cares. It's
No
fine.
one
I
cares.
just
Yeah.
enjoy yourself.
I love how Smash Bros does that though, where they like wrap it in this thing of like this is a kid playing with his toys, like the
Yeah,
master hand.
I
I
love
think that's
that though.
cool.
Yeah, I love that from the very beginning of Smash Brothers.
Yeah, which is that exactly how little kids play with their toys too.
It's
They
true.
grab their
Mhm.
Power Rangers and their Ninja Turtles and they fight.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I did it anyway. Um, so yeah, we find where I am in my notes here. Um, each game sort of explores a different aspect of these alternate realities. So the alternate realities are always born from like the collective consciousness of the people, right? So it's
Mhm.
usually like this area is going through something, and like the trauma of the people has spawned this like alternate reality. And so what the main characters do is they go into this alternate reality and try to solve the problems that will then solve the problems in the real world, right? Um, so each game has its own alternate reality that is born from a different like theme from that collective consciousness, and those get more solidified the further into the series you get, which is really cool, I think. But structurally, the games are generally pretty similar, especially from Persona 3 on. There is definitely like a dividing line between Persona 1 and 2, and then 3 and beyond. Um, because 3 and beyond is where it really gets into like half visual novel territory. Um, although
Mhm.
although the first two games are very story heavy, also. The series usually has something to say about society. Whatever you're fighting in the alternate reality, like I said, is usually a manifestation of whatever that theme is. Like the game is like critiquing, right? They're usually focused on high school kids using this alternate reality to fix the problems caused by adults in the real world. It's very strange. It's all extremely anime, and I'm here for it.
Yeah,
Uh,
it sounds great. Like it sounds just fun. And I mean, we all went to high school, so it's kind of fun to play
yeah,
the high school drama thing again.
yeah. Well, and that's part of why they chose to do the high school setting. They were like, it doesn't matter where like what stage in life you are, at least for the group of people these games are aimed at. It's like we all went through that time where we were students, right? And like dealt with that stuff. So even if you are a student now, this resonates in a way with you. If you were a student 30 years ago, this resonates with you, right? Like it's very everybody can like find something to attach to.
Yeah.
Um, the series as a whole, especially these days, is famous for its social links system, which I believe only really came in Persona 3. Um, and that made the story like a lot more, or the game's a lot more story heavy. especially compared to the larger parent series, which is still a story heavy game, but like we veer into like visual novel territory with the Persona games. Like you're spending, it's like, I don't know what the actual division is, but it feels like a 50-50 split between visual novel and then gameplay, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
remember playing it with you, and it was a lot of like, oh, we're just here to get a little story now, and we're gonna get some story for like 10 minutes, and that's just okay.
yeah,
That's just the way the
or
game works.
I feel like between dungeons in Persona 5, you have like you spend like 10 hours in a dungeon in Persona, and then like interspersed in that is like probably another 10 hours of story of just
Yeah.
like going about living your life on days where you don't go to the
Hmm.
metaverse. In That's in Persona 5 is the metaverse. Um so I love it, but if you were like not a person who cares about story and you just want to get on with it, um
This might not be the game
this
series.
isn't it. This ain't it. Though Persona 5 Tactica, you can skip everything, and because you don't need to know like where to go, like the story doesn't tell you where to go or do anything. Like you're just presented with tactical puzzles in Persona 5 Tactica. You could just skip all the cutscenes and then just do the battles, and like I guess you would have fun,
Mm, yeah, that's kind of like a weird situation because
but I
you're
wouldn't
missing the
recommend it.
point. The
Yeah,
point of it is to get the fun story.
yeah. I wouldn't recommend playing it, but you could.
Hmm.
If you did that in other Persona games, you'd be like, I don't know what to do next. I don't know why I'm doing this. So you would
And then
have a
we'd have to
bad
be
time
like,
playing it.
were you listening to the story to know where to go? And then Tyler and I would use that as a teaching moment on you.
That's
That's
right.
what we would do.
That's right. Um, so the social links system involves your characters spending time each day in the real world doing real world things like going to school, hanging out with friends, having a job, the kinds of things high school kids have to deal with.
Eating
Um,
hot pot.
Yep, hot pot is very important.
Hmm.
The choices you make on how to spend each day affect your stats for when you're fighting in the other parts of the game. Whether like if you're going to your job, you're making money. If you go work out, you get some strength. You know, if you do these things, it kind of affects your stats. And then the coolest part about this system is how you are rewarded gameplay wise for like stats and abilities for the things you do here. You're also rewarded story wise because as you progress the story with each particular character, and this is a very like explicitly like described thing in the game. It's called social links, and like you will like sort of level up your link with individual characters in the game. As you do that, you each character sort of has their own story that they go through, and they become sort of changed by the end of that story. And you usually get some gameplay buffs by the end. And then you usually can like pick a love interest as well, and each love interest gets you like different
This
bonuses.
romance?
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So, yeah, you want to choose. It's one of those things where you're like, I want to choose this person because I like the character better. But if I choose this person, I get better buffs. Like,
You're
which one do I
torn.
do? And you can't. Sometimes they let you do more than one, and then that's funny when they find out about it. It's that's later on. Um, so that thing is really cool. That's what really sets the series apart from other JRPGs, I think, is that social link system and how you can strategically, because you only have a certain amount of time each day to do things, and the story usually takes place over a year. So you like once you're done doing things for that day, it becomes the next day, right? And you have deadlines of like when you need to beat dungeons by, or when certain things happen on certain days, like finals at school. Like if you didn't study, you might have a bad time when it comes time to take finals, things like that.
Oh, you can fail high school again if you failed it. If you could fail high school in real life and then fail it again in a video game.
You sure can.
Oh man, that's rough.
So yeah, that's the stuff that really sets it apart from other JRPGs, I think. They are also all connected by a place called the Velvet Room, which
Sounds
has a
very
very
fancy.
it is very fancy. It's a place where all your persona related tasks occur. So your fusions and like if you want to store personas or pull personas out of storage or things like that. There's usually a lot of story stuff that happens in there too. It has a very sweet theme song that plays on the piano, and there's like somebody singing in the background, and all the games have the same one, and it's really good.
The same
Uh,
theme song for the Velvet
and
Room?
yeah, Velvet Room always
It's
has the
all
same
the
theme.
same.
Yeah.
All
It's always
right.
run by a person called Igor. And usually another person usually has like an assistant person or a couple of assistants. And those people usually, I don't know if it's always, but they always have a name taken from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the book. I think one of them has it taken from a like the Ghost of Frankenstein movie. So maybe not from the book. But I thought that's kind of interesting that like they're all like
That's
Frankenstein
an
characters.
interesting choice. Yeah, like, is there like any other connections in the series to Frankenstein, or is it just kind of like this is just a random thing they've always
Uh,
done, so they just do it?
Maybe like I'm just spitballing here, but like because you do like persona fusions in the Velvet Room, maybe there's like a feeling of sort of a Frankenstein's. Like it's always when you
Mm,
do that, there's always like a machine doing something, and every game is different. But there's always like a machine doing something. It feels like they're flipping switches and like electricity or whatever. Or in other some games they're like doing guillotines or things like that. But
okay,
um,
so that makes sense then. It's
so
like a,
yeah,
yeah, it's the theming of Frankenstein, and you're creating and fusing something together.
yeah. So
Okay,
I guess it makes sense. But even if it didn't, I would be fine with that. I like a
yeah,
good theme, even if it doesn't make sense.
sometimes you just gotta throw a Frankenstein reference in. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with it. We're fine with it here.
That's right. Each game differs in how they present the Velvet Room. It's only ever entered by the protagonist, with a few exceptions. Usually, the protagonist that you play has some sort of special ability with personas. In 3 and onward, you're the protagonist. You is the only person that can switch personas. Everybody else just
Mm.
has their one. So you
So
go to
you're
the
special in a
yeah,
way.
you're this the special boy or girl in Persona 3 Portable.
Mm.
Um, yeah, you are the special person in those games. So that's I guess that explains why you get to go to the Velvet Room. I don't know, you're special. And there's a few exceptions over the course of the series. I think sometimes other people get brought there. The Velvet Room gets brought to it's like on a train in the last part of Persona 5 Tactica, and like everybody is in it at the end of that game. So it's a little wibbly wobbly.
They do
Um,
it. They kind of freestyle the Velvet Room how they want to, based on the
They
game.
really do. And in Persona 5 Tactica, Igor is gone for some reason. I can't remember why. I don't know if he's gone missing or whatever. So like the Velvet Room is sort of like it's not under well control, and it kind of goes off the rails literally because it's a train. So yeah, the idea for the series, the Persona game, the first Persona game, came about after the game Shin Megami Tensei If dot dot dot. That's important. If dot dot dot, which was a spin-off itself from the main Shin Megami
So
Tensei
it's
series.
called Shin Megami Tensei If.
If, and I feel like you have to put your finger up when you say it. This is what if you're not watching the video, you can't see us do this, but we're like if putting our
If,
finger up.
and like you're stopping someone in the middle of
Yes.
it. Okay.
If dot 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 ellipses.
Is there a dot 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 in the title too?
Yes.
Okay, also important.
Yep. So this game is a Shin Megami Tensei game. It's about a high school that gets sucked into a demon realm after a bad demon summoning spell. Demon summoning spell goes wrong.
Classic high school.
Right. We've all been there, right? We've all been sucked into the demon realm after a spell gone wrong. That's why these games are so relatable.
That's right.
We've all been through that. I do think that Persona games are actually relatable for the stuff that happens outside of whatever alternate reality each game has. So I joke about them being relatable in that way, but they are actually kind of relatable.
I think that's what one of the reasons they're so popular too. Is
Yeah.
like it seems like people get really grabbed into these stories. So
Yes. Yeah. So that game has never been released outside of Japan at all in any capacity. There's a fan translation online, so if you know how to do that, it's a Super Nintendo game. You can play that. I've never played it. Probably won't. Although if I had infinite time, it would be on the list to get played
but I
eventually.
bet if you don't want to like try to figure out how to play it, there's probably a YouTube video of someone playing it that you could
Probably.
watch.
Yep.
That's
And that
honestly, that's this. I mean, I feel like that's kind of a secret for video game history. If you're like, I don't know if I have access to this game. Well, guess what? Someone probably played it on YouTube and put it up there. So
and
you can
they
at
have
least kind of experience it in that way.
that's right. They have
And that's what's
50
cool.
hours of videos that they've been uploading in 10-minute chunks.
That's right. They have some long plays, but they're only 10 minutes long and there's 60 parts.
Yeah, so that game again hasn't come out outside of Japan at all, but it was really well received in Japan after it came out on the Super Nintendo in 1994. So the creators of the Megami Tensei series, that's Koji Okada and Kazuma Kaneko, they decided they wanted to explore those themes a little bit further. And so while I would argue that the series really kicks into the gear with the release of the third game, which came out 7 years after the release of the second part of Persona 2, I do want to lay the groundwork here a bit. And for this episode today, we're going to talk about the first game, which is
Persona 1.
Revelations.
Oh,
Persona.
Revelations.
That's what it was called when it first came out in the US. When it was remade on the PSP, it was called Shin Megami Tensei Persona.
Okay.
But
Okay.
Revelations was sort of like the title that Atlas was using for the Shin Megami Tensei series in the US or in English speaking places, because there were a couple other games that had come out. There's like a Game Boy Color game that was called Revelations something, and then there's like some other Revelations game. That's what they were calling Shin Megami Tensei.
And these Shin Megami Tensei games are all about like demons and dark stuff. It sounds
Yeah.
like spooky, scary stuff is what you're saying.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
So for the first Persona game, let's get into the grime facts.
And these are the real deal grime facts.
Real deal grime facts, developed by Atlas,
Here
also
we go.
published by Atlas, I believe. It came out on September 20th, 1996 in Japan and December 14th, 1996 in the United States or North America, which again, very short turnaround for a Japanese game in those
really
days. I feel
fast.
Like. Yeah.
Really, because based on some of the other titles we talked about on this show, it's minimum 6 months, normally a year.
Yeah. And for like Final Fantasy games, they'd be like, half of them didn't even come out in the US until Final Fantasy VII.
A lot because they thought we were bad at video games.
True. You know? And I think there were a lot of Japanese games that never made it over here because they thought we were bad at video games. And, maybe we are. I'm bad at video games.
I'm bad too. I'm terrible at video games. Why are we even here? I'm just kidding.
I know a lot about video games, but I am bad at them.
We love them so much, but we're bad at them. And that's why we do this.
I would never claim on this podcast to be good at video games in any capacity.
I've never won a video game in my life. I don't even know.
No, I've seen some of your win-loss records in games, just all straight losses.
Just all L's. L's all the way down, as they say.
Yep. The game originally came out on the PlayStation, but it also had a really great PSP remake, that's the best way to play it today. Nobody disagrees with that, mostly because the English translation, and we'll get into this, the English translation is truly awful. Also cuts out about half the game. So
on the non-PSP version?
Yeah.
So you want to play on PSP so that way you can actually experience the whole thing.
Yes. You get a better translation and you get half of the game is still there.
I can't believe they just were like, just ship it. It's fine.
Yeah, I think the prevailing wisdom here, the prevailing wisdom there is like they really wanted the game to come out for like Christmas that year, and they just cut half of it just to make that deadline because all that content is actually on the disc. It just hasn't been translated. It's all like it clearly is unfinished, but it's all there. So they wanted to just like get this thing out the door for holidays. That's kind of what people on the internet think.
Speculate. Okay.
Yeah. So it sold 209,000 copies for the PSP version worldwide and 391,000 copies for the PlayStation version in Japan specifically. I couldn't get US numbers. They're probably not that high.
Mm-hmm.
It's a JRPG with some light tactical stuff like positioning on the board matters in ways that other Persona games don't have, or that I would also argue are not like inherent to JRPGs. Average time to complete 31 and a half hours, which is I think that's like the sweet spot for JRPG length, to be honest. Like up to 50 is like maybe when you get past 50, man, I'm getting tired. Even Persona 5, like that took me like 2 years to finish because I was playing it in like 20-hour chunks.
You were like doing it like throughout. You do it for like a couple months and you take a break and then you come back and you take a break. I remember that. It was an adventure. It was quite the ride for me as your friend, just watching you play it. It was a lot.
But it is a great game, and I do highly recommend it.
It is a great game, and you get as someone who was just watching you play, I got invested in the story. I was excited about it.
Yeah, it's great. I would love for you to play that game. I'm sad it's not on Game Pass anymore.
Yeah,
take it away.
We got that, but there's a lot of games. We got Metal Gear. We could do Metal Gear.
That's true. We do need to play Metal Gear.
Mm-hmm.
So the Metacritic score is generally pretty good. High 70s, low 80s for most outlets. Metacritic specifically has 80% for the PlayStation version and 78% for PSP. I don't think you can compare those numbers because they're 15 years apart. The gaming landscape is just different in those times, right? Like,
yeah,
if you compare them today, missing half the game and having a terrible translation is clearly awful, right? But the standards were lower in 1996. We were just happy we got the game at all.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone even noticed reviewing or knew because
they might not have.
They're only playing. They didn't play the Japanese version of the game. Most likely, they wouldn't have known.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I don't want to say it's a bad translation. It's a bad localization, and there is a distinction between localization and translation. Like translation is just taking the words and just converting them to English, right? Localization is like where you go through. You do that part, you translate, but you also do like If there's a joke that works in Japanese but doesn't work in English, you need to figure out another way to do that, right? Like you have to not
Like,
just like
yeah,
direct quote, right?
cultural changes in a way.
Cultural changes, which huge in the Persona series for this first game. They took some liberties they should not have taken. Um, but I'm mostly about like language changes. Like, hey, if you have a pun in Japanese, it doesn't work in English. Like, figure something else out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't just like act like you made a pun in English when you
The
clearly didn't,
direct
right?
a direct English translation, and then all the characters laugh, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah, you're just like, huh? Yeah, which was I'm sure it was very funny in Japanese, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, and I think you're correct about like most U.S. reviewers hadn't played the Japanese original, so they didn't have anything to compare it to, right?
No
Um,
idea.
so when I first saw screenshots of Revelations Persona, I thought it looked really good for a Super Nintendo game, and I saw the 3D dungeon crawling segments, and I was like totally blown away. And then I realized it's not a Super Nintendo game; it's actually a PlayStation game, and it does not look very good for a PlayStation game. The 2D sections look dated. The 3D sections, like the actual dungeon crawling, probably looked better in their day than they do now. And I understand original PlayStation is not a PlayStation 5. Like, I'm not judging it by today's standards, but it's still kind of rough.
It looks a
By
little rough,
It looks a
huh?
little rough. And I would argue that the series change to being like third person for the dungeon crawling sections was the right choice. First person dungeon crawling is weird. But hey, things were different in the 90s. We didn't know. We just didn't know
Mm-hmm. No one
how
knew how to
things
do
could
it.
be. No one knew how to
Yeah,
do it. We're all just messing around. I say we like I was doing anything in the 90s of
yeah.
value.
We were playing video games in the '90s, you and I.
That's true. And I
We were
wasn't playing
children.
this.
We were
Yeah.
just children. I was
I was
playing a lot of Mario Kart,
Yep.
probably.
I was 6 years old in 1996. I had just gotten my Super Nintendo and I was playing a lot of Super Mario Kart.
I was 8 years old, and I was probably playing a Super Nintendo at a babysitter's house. That's what I was
So
doing. Mm-hmm.
could have been playing I guess Shin Megami Tensei series. I don't think any of those games came to the US.
I
So
wouldn't
we
have.
couldn't have been playing them.
I would have been so scared. I was the kind of child that would be like guilty if I was playing Mortal Kombat or if someone else was playing Mortal Kombat. Like I'd feel like I had to tell my mom.
Yeah.
I was a narc, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I had a phase because my mom was pretty restrictive on the games that I played. Like, if I wasn't 13, she wasn't let me play teen games, right? Like she just sort
Yeah.
of went by the box, which is what those ratings are for. That's good parenting, I suppose. But there was a period of time where I was like playing teen rated games at my friend's house and I would like feel bad about it. And then I realized that I didn't have to tell her and it was going to be fine and everything was
Yeah.
fine. Sorry, mom, I played games I shouldn't have. She knows.
She knows. She's fine. You've turned out to be a nice young man, Tyler.
Yeah, she's a middle school counselor. She knows kids do stuff at
Yeah.
their friends' houses, but
She knows kids lie.
I
That's all they do.
probably wouldn't have lied if she asked me if she was like, "Did you play GoldenEye?" I probably wouldn't have lied to her about it, but she never asked. So
Yeah, I'd have been like, yeah, I
I'd be
played
like,
it.
"I
It
played
wasn't Echo the Dolphin. It was Mortal
it."
Kombat.
Yeah, I was playing Killer Instinct. I did borrow Killer Instinct from a friend when I was a kid, and I just
Was
played it a lot.
Killer Instinct as bloody as Mortal Kombat? I don't really remember.
I don't know.
They didn't have fatalities in Killer Instinct, did they?
I want to say it was rated teen on the Super Nintendo. Let's look it up.
Okay.
We're taking a Persona
Sorry,
break.
everybody. This is the classic Tyler Mike tangent moment. We're doing it. I wish
Killer
I had it.
Instinct.
We should get a sound drop on your soundboard that's like tangent. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll just go back and record you saying tangent,
that works for me too. You
and
know?
then I'll overlay it with me just saying it now.
Mhm.
I can't tell Super Nintendo, what was it rated?
If it was on Super Nintendo, it was probably based on the Super Nintendo copy of Mortal Kombat. Not that bad.
It was rated T for teen.
Yeah, because at
On
that
Super
time,
Nintendo.
Super Nintendo wouldn't have let Mortal
That's a good
Kombat
point. That's a
or
good
Killer
point.
Instinct be that violent. So
Yeah,
if they changed the blood to sweat in Mortal Kombat, they're not going to let Killer Instinct have fatalities.
And Killer Instinct was rare, so they were owned by Nintendo at that point in time.
Mhm.
They weren't doing anything they weren't supposed to do, for sure. So anyway, that's our
Tangent.
So yeah, the battles take place in a turn-based fashion, but kind of on a grid. I wouldn't call it a tactical RPG like Fire Emblem or XCOM, where it's like a big chess match. But certain attacks have like different ranges, and so arranging your characters on the grid, like this very rudimentary grid, like if you do that in the right way, you can sort of avoid damage while making sure your attacks hit. So there's like some like sort of positioning happening, but not on the level of like a normal tactical RPG.
Yeah.
In combat, you have a few options. You can attack with a weapon, like melee attack. You can
Mhm.
attack with your gun. That's a ranged attack. You can attack with your persona, which we'll get into in a minute, or you can contact the enemy, which is a different thing that most RPGs don't do. If you choose contact, you enter into a conversation with the demon in hopes of persuading them to help you by giving you money or a spell card, which you can use to fuse new personas. You can also choose which demon to talk to in the battle. So, because like you can fight more than one thing at a time,
Mhm.
and then which character does the talking. And there's a whole complex system here of emotions and traits. But basically, if you have the right person say the right things to the right demon, you can get them to do stuff for you. Basically give you spell cards, give you money, maybe you make them leave, or if you mess up, they'll give you status ailments that'll hurt you. So there's a little bit of risk if you do contact and you don't quite
I like
nail it.
that though.
Yeah.
That feels very D&D to me,
Yeah.
because you always have the D&D player that wants to talk to the monster before fighting it, and that seems like Persona's giving you that option.
Yeah. So you can kind of do that, and knowing the traits of the demons that you're talking to and what conversational capabilities your party has is sort of key in like getting as many spell cards as you can if you want to fuse all the best personas. That's like your goal is to fuse all the personas, which you do get a reward for doing. You get the best persona if you fuse all the other ones. So that's like worthwhile
So
for
what
you
you're
to
saying is
pursue.
if you want to be good at Persona, you're going to have to talk to demons, essentially. You're going to have
Yes,
to talk to some demons.
you're gonna have to talk to some demons, and if you got a problem with that, you're playing the wrong game.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Heard it
Yep.
here first, folks.
Yep. So speaking of personas, which I mentioned earlier are like a thing you can use in battle, they sort of function as like the magic system in the game. Um, each character in your party can have up to, this is the first game specifically, each character in your party can have up to 3 personas equipped, each with their own sets of strengths, weaknesses, and spells. This is different from later games. Like I said, the main character is the only one that can switch personas in later games, and then everybody else just has their persona that's theirs. You can do sub personas in Persona 5 Tactica, which sort of let you like every person gets like 2 personas basically, but that's a
Hmm.
that's not a main game. It doesn't count.
Yeah, it doesn't count. We're not talking about that here.
Yeah. In this game, if you change your persona that on a character, that takes up the whole turn. In later games, changing your persona actually doesn't take up a turn. You can just switch to that persona and use their spell in the same turn. So, yeah, like I said, it's a classic JRPG. So, of course, experience points and levels come into play. You level up yourself, your personas level up. And it's a 90s JRPG. So, get ready to grind, baby.
Yeah, you're gonna get some. You got to get some levels.
Yeah, you're going to spend 31. If this game is 31 and a half hours long, you're going to spend 20 of them grinding. I don't know if that's
20
true.
grinding, 10 actually getting story beats and fighting.
I don't know if that's the actual breakdown, but
Yeah,
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't that far from the truth.
not surprising. I was
Um,
I was blown away that I had to hit a really grindy part in Violet, Pokemon Violet, because I'm like,
yeah.
this is kind of a newer game, and I feel like the grinding nature of like Pokemon games has kind of been let go a little bit in the last few years.
Mhm.
But I'm like, I guess we're back into it now in Violet. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I would love to like be a fly on the wall in those design decisions when it comes to experience points and grinding in games because generally I think most of us agree that like grinding just to grind to get your numbers up kind of feels bad most of the time.
Hmm.
Some people are into it, like it's kind of if you can do it in the background, it's like maybe it's okay, um but then like how do you accurately sort of make the player feel like they're progressing in power? And I think that doing that on a story level where like just if you make it to this point in the story, you get more power, like that takes away agency from the player. I think it feels well when you spend 20 hours grinding to get your Pokemon to level 100 in Pokemon, that time feels sort of wasted because you're not really doing anything. But the feeling of like one-shotting everything because you spent 20 hours like just fighting Rattatas in the
Yeah, just
grass,
like the
it
Elite
does
Four
feel
doesn't even
kind of
matter.
good.
Yeah, that's true. The
It feels
payoff
like you
feels
earned it,
good.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas like when you just get stuff from the story, it doesn't quite feel as earned in that sense. So anyway, that's a game design question that's sort of unrelated to Persona, but
Yeah. Any
something
game
that
designers out there, email us,
yeah,
codexhistorypodcast at
yes,
gmail.com.
please. Yeah, this story in the first Persona game has 2 routes, one of which is not available in the US translation. Like I said, it's just not there.
Just gone.
It's just gone.
Including
Um,
the PSP one?
no, it is in the PSP one.
Okay, but in
That's the best place to
in the
play it.
PlayStation version, it's gone.
It's
Gotcha,
gone.
gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay.
So you kind of pick a few hours in, you sort of get the choice to do the Sebec route, SEBEC. That's an acronym. for an evil corporation called Saiki Electronics and Biological and Energy Corporation. They sound very evil. They are. They've created a machine that alters reality called the Diva System. This is the main storyline. This is the one you are expected to complete first, although you can just go straight to the other storyline. But it's harder, and the story is like not quite as satisfying from what I've told. Like I said, I haven't spent a ton of time with this game. I've just watched plays online, and I have played a couple hours of the PSP remake. But the second storyline is known as the Snow Queen route. Is like I said, it's harder. It follows a different story around a cursed mask from a production of like a play version of the 1844 fairy tale, The Snow Queen. Coincidentally, this fairy tale is also the same fairy tale that the first Frozen movie is sort of very loosely based off of. So,
Frozen Persona crossover, anyone?
we
Is
could.
Jack Frost really Olaf the Snowman? You be the judge.
Who can say?
No one knows.
That's right. So yeah, like I said, that route is sort of more reserved for the second playthrough by somebody who's more experienced with the game. And also there are story beats in it that sort of assume you have already played the other route. So there is like an order to play them in, but you do get to choose, I guess.
Okay, cool.
I don't want to cover too much of the story here, mostly for spoiler reasons, but also because I haven't actually played it all the way through myself. So I don't want to like mess anything up and make somebody angry about it. I would love to actually one day really go through this game. But when I started writing this, I was like, I want to talk about Persona 3, 4, and 5. And I was like, well, I probably should talk about the earlier games. And then I was like, oh, dang, I should probably play these games.
But when we get to Persona 3, 4, and 5, it's going to be like, we're getting into it.
Yeah.
You know, people ask us for long episodes. These are going to kind of be longer episodes.
I think so.
We're getting in. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm adding the PSP version to my list because I do really want to play through the origins of the series. I'm going to throw it on easy mode and I'm going to blast through it on my PSP, which I do have a actual PSP.
Wow. Original hardware time.
I do. I have the Darth Vader PSP.
Whoa. Even better. Cool. Yeah. It's cool.
Super cool. So now let's talk about the localization. As I said, it's kind of a mess. Because the original release of Revelations Persona is a product of a different time of the 90s. In like these days, when a Japanese game gets released in the West, the localizations are generally pretty good. They're pretty faithful to the source material, right? They obviously translate everything, and then like jokes and stuff sort of get localized in a good way. But they largely retain like the same story. Like the characters sort of keep their same names, right?
Yeah.
The cities like keep their same names. The setting it generally stays the same, right? They take some liberties and like jokes and stuff like that, but generally it's pretty faithful. In the 90s, things were a little bit different. A lot of Japanese games didn't make it over to Western shores at all, mostly because publishers were worried that games that Japanese players liked wouldn't resonate with Western audiences, be that because of there's like difficulty issues, like you said, like the lost levels of Super Mario Brothers just didn't make it here until like years later, right? We call them the lost levels. It's actually Super Mario Brothers 2 in Japan.
Yeah.
And then what we got is Super Mario Brothers 2. They released in Japan.
Panic.
Yeah.
And then switched it to reskinned it to Super Mario Brothers.
Right.
Yeah.
And they released it in Japan as Super Mario USA because yeah. So anyway, there's a little bit of trivia.
A little bit of history for you, everybody, on this video game history podcast.
That's right. So yeah, like I said, a lot of games just never made it over, especially those that took place in Japan or dealt with Japanese culture. I sort of understand the logic, and maybe it was more true like back in those days. Like I don't know what like young adults in the 90s if they cared about Japanese culture, if that was like a huge turnoff for them. I feel like that's not really the case for people today, but we are a much more interconnected world than we were back then.
Yeah, a lot more globalization today than back then, you know. That's why you see those like stores in the mall that are like Japanese culture stores kind of with all like the Gundams and all the statues and everything in them. So
yeah. So it's different now, and that's probably why localizations are better. But back in those days, whether it was true or not, that's sort of what publishers thought. And so things were different. But sometimes games like this did make it to the West. And then when they were localized, of course. They were super localized. Like Revelations Persona is one example where they took this to the extreme. First of all, they changed the like title, right? It's called Megami something in Japanese. I can't remember exactly. To sort of indicate that's a spinoff of the Megami Tensei series. They just call it Revelations here that's what they called it in '96. Nowadays, they just call it Shin Megami Tensei Persona, and Persona is so big, it's just Persona now. I think 5 doesn't even have the Shin Megami Tensei title on
It
it.
just says Persona 5 and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Japanese Persona game takes place at a high school in Japan, of course, the first Persona game. The characters are Japanese mostly. I think there's one person who's like an American immigrant or something like that. But the game is like steeped in Japanese culture. Revelations Persona in its English localization is not that. They go to great lengths to hide the Japanese roots of this game. They changed the name of the town that it's set in, the fictional town that it's set in. They changed the name of every character in the game. They changed the race of one character, which is like pretty yikes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, they removed the Snow Queen storyline, although that's probably more for just time reasons, not like cultural reasons. I think they just didn't have time.
Yeah. It seems weird that they would remove the Snow Queen storyline if they're trying to get it out by Christmas, the winter months. That's kind of
That's a
interesting.
good point.
They
But
would
they
remove
couldn't do the Snow Queen storyline without the
without.
Seebeck storyline because it
Yeah, you
doesn't
have
make
to have
sense
both.
without it.
Gotcha.
So if you had to cut a storyline, that's the one to do. And they are like branches of a storyline, right? They don't really converge, I don't think. So like if you're looking for places to cut corners when you're trying to get this game out on a tight timeline, cutting one of those branches seems like a pretty good call.
The way to go, yeah.
Even if it's a Snow Queen branch, which is a bummer.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, all that content is still on the disc. It's just clearly unfinished and untranslated, and like you can't really play it. This discrepancy in localization is kind of peculiar for the series, since later entries like celebrate how Japanese they are, right? Like spell names are left unchanged in later Persona games, which takes a little bit of getting used to if you're new to the series. If you don't know that like Agi is fire or Bufu is ice, you're going to learn from these Persona games. But in the first game, the translation like sort of just directly translated all those things, which I don't have. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. So yeah, but it's just like the way that they changed everybody's name to be like sort of like Americanized or
here's Brad
names. Yeah,
Shane,
yeah. Mark,
Craig.
Yeah, basically that. And then they changed the race of one character, which was like, why?
Yeah, I was hoping it would go kind of the Star Tropics route where they pick really stereotypical stuff, like call everything cola.
Yeah, well,
Mike
Star
Jones.
Tropics was like kind of a parody, though, right?
It was a parody, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it would be funny if they went full bore with it and just got really into like making. It would be funny if they made fun of American culture in the Persona localization. I would have loved that.
I don't think they're doing that. No. I think they were just like, we can't make this game seem Japanese is like kind of what they were going for, which is maybe not the right approach for a game that is very heavily Japanese. So I don't know. But like I said, fortunately, the PSP remake of the original Persona, they redo the whole translation. They undo the changes that they should undo. Names are the same as they are in Japan. They keep the Snow Queen storyline. They do change some lines from the original game that were a little racist. So they fixed those too. Those are just, I don't know if those were translation errors or if it just was a different time and it wasn't weird to say the racist things they said, but they fixed them in the PSP.
Hey, glad they fixed it. That's good.
Yeah. So that's kind of the first Persona game. I want to talk a little bit about the legacy, and this is sort of gonna bleed over into the other Persona games as well, because this one has gone on a lot longer than I thought it would. I originally thought I would cover the first 2 games here so we could get them out of the way and go to the ones that I want to talk about, 3, 4, and 5. Then as I got into it, I was like, this is.
I loved getting your texts, just being like, this is going to be longer than I thought. Yep, it's just going to be one game. Yep,
it's getting long. Oh no.
People ask for longer episodes, so here you are. There are going to be some longer episodes for the Persona series. Everybody.
I don't mind a clean break between games. Like if you see the first Persona and you're like, ooh, nice, and then you see the second one, you're like, I didn't care about that one, and then you're like Persona 3, and you go, yes, that's great. Then you can do that. If we put them all in one episode, then you don't have that ability. So I'm just looking out for the listener here.
That's right. Tyler's got the listeners back, is what we're saying.
That's right. So yeah. From a historical standpoint, I think this is the start of a classic series. It's one that didn't gain a ton of momentum until more recent entries. Persona 5 in particular is like, it's mainstream now, right? With Persona 5, I would say. 3 and 4 to a lesser extent, I think they're still niche, but they were like very popular in their niche. And I think as a whole, the history of this series is really relevant in a cultural way, especially when it comes to taking Japanese themes and motifs and translating them to a Western audience, specifically North America, which, if you haven't realized it by now, that's the biggest lens through which we analyze video game history. Like we talk about it from a Western perspective, because that's what we know. It's how we grew up, right? So these games that are developed like from a different perspective, how they get brought over to North America is always something that is that I'm always interested in, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so I think the first Persona game is practically a miracle that it showed up on Western shores. I think in those days it wouldn't have been weird at all for this game to just stay in Japan and not even attempt to be localized. They did mess up that localization, that's for sure. I think everybody agrees that the way they did it was a bad call. But as the series go on, we see better and better localizations. Um, whether or not this is a direct result of more money being available for those localizations, I'm sure that's the case. But I think the reason that companies deemed it worthwhile to invest in localization for these kinds of games is because they were getting more and more popular over here, right? And I don't know if that's a shift in society here or like a shift in culture over here where this stuff became like more palatable to our tastes, or if it was always that way and they were just making assumptions about culture here. I don't really know that because I was a small child in the 90s, so somebody would have to chime in who's a little bit older maybe.
Yeah. I mean, part of me is leaning towards it's a shift in like people like Japanese culture is a more popular now. Definitely. I feel like you could say that without it being an argument at all.
Yeah,
Speaking like anime is bigger than it ever has been in the United States. Just like by even saying those stores in the mall exist, I think that's saying something too. But I also wonder if maybe video game storytelling has become more popular as well. And if there's one thing that Persona is known for, it's video game storytelling. Like
that's true.
with these longer form, it's almost like this is a video game that's a novel in one in a way. Like and
Yeah,
it's not like an interactive novel or like the video game. What's the term now? There's a term for like narrative games that are
like
the
walking simulators.
yeah, I guess, like, but it's not that. It's a true video game, but it has those kind of narrative elements in it.
Yeah,
Interactive fiction elements. So it's like that's why I think it's popular too. But
yeah, that's for sure. I
but I
think
would.
that
Oh, go ahead.
you had
I
something
just
to
was
add.
saying I agree with you in that I would love to hear from someone that grew up in the '90s, like older than us, that was growing up in the '90s at this time, like
Yeah.
what they experienced with like these games coming out. I would love to hear that as well.
Yeah. Like, did you want this and were disappointed in what you
Hmm.
could get? Or did cultural like tastes change over time?
Yeah.
That's what I'm very interested in, not something that I know off the top of my head. But I think this series is a really cool indicator of how Western audiences have opened up to things with cultural roots like outside of our own, especially like you said, when it comes to like Japanese stuff. If you look at this series, you see one that starts off trying very hard to deny its Japanese roots. It's trying not to be a Japanese game. It wants to just be like a Western game, right? But as we go further and further, those pretenses are dropped, and the latest titles make no attempt whatsoever to hide this. They celebrate it, and that's like part of why we love Persona, right? Like a Persona game that doesn't take place in Japan is, I mean, maybe there could be something interesting to say about American society if you did it set in America, or like you could because of the collective unconsciousness thing summoning alternate realities, like you could do that somewhere else, and that would be like a commentary on that other place, right? But it's almost like a Grand Theft Auto game being set somewhere that's not in the US. And I know there were a couple of London games. But like the Grand Theft Auto series itself it's a parody of American culture, but it like
Hmm.
is so wrapped in American culture that it's hard to think about it done somewhere else unless you were doing it as a parody of that culture. And it would have to be made by people who are of that culture, right? I would not want like Americans to make a parody of something else. I don't know. That could be weird.
You don't want, yeah, we don't want Americans making a parody of a Persona game. That's not what we need. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, while the game itself, I think, is kind of mid, probably, though I'll spend some more time with it in the future, and like I'll get back to you on it. But I think the enduring cultural legacy of the series that it spawned is really, really cool, and that's what makes it worth at least checking out. So that's the first game, the first Persona game. Next time we'll talk about Persona 2 Innocent Sin and Persona
Ooh,
2 Eternal Punishment. That's 2 games.
real cool subtitles there too. Very dark
Yeah.
and mysterious subtitles.
Yeah. And Eternal Punishment is a direct sequel to Innocent Sin. So they're not like concurrent storylines as far as I know. But we'll find out more as we get into them. I wasn't trying to draw the series out into a ton of episodes, but there was a lot more here than I thought. So maybe we'll get there. I do want to keep talking about the series as it relates to this like changing of cultural acceptance in the West or in North America, at least. I think it's because it's such a cool barometer of that, I think. So I'll keep like trying to tie it back into that line of thought. But then there's also the larger Shin Megami Tensei series, which is get pretty big too. You've got the Digital Devil Saga, which is another like spin-off series of it. You've got the Devil Survivor series, the Soul Hackers games as well, which I think are a spin-off of Demon Summoner or Devil Summoner series. I think the Soul Hackers games is like a sub series of Megami Tensei. So
We're going down the rabbit hole today.
Yeah, it gets pretty wild. But and then there's also Persona spinoffs to talk about as well. And the Persona series I think is bigger than its parent series at this point. So yeah, but we got a lot to talk about in the future. But I want to ask you what you've been playing.
Ooh, I have been playing mostly Spider-Man Remastered for PC this week. I'm loving it. I'm having a good time. This is what I want to talk about with it. It is the most seamless experience I have had in a video game in a long time, in that the way you do side stuff is Peter Parker will just say, I got some time to kill, right? And then you go do side stuff, and then the main story missions start. But you don't have to go there right away. You can just go to that point when you feel like it. But my favorite thing is when I was getting a call to be like, you need to go to Fisk Towers for something, right? And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then I clicked on a backpack, and the cutscene for the backpack started. And then when it ended, I went back to the main game, and he called her back and he said, hey, sorry, I had something I got tied up with there. And they kept going with the story about Fisk Towers. And I'm like, this is amazing. It just feels like it's all one connected story, even though there's so much stuff to do and see.
Yeah,
And I love it. I'm having a great time. I'm probably like 5 hours in. I didn't get to play as much as I wanted to this week, but I'm in it. I'm loving it. I love that you get all the spider suits. Like as you level up, it just unlocks the cosmetic suits and you can just kind of pick one and then put the gadgets you want on it. I think that's brilliant. And yeah, I'm getting better at the combat. I'm still not great at it, but I'm getting better
yeah,
at it. I use the bonus action, the bonus action, the bonus
like the
like
ultimate ability or whatever.
yeah, the ultimate ability that does the bonus to fill up the meter so that way I can heal, or I can one shot guys that I know I am annoyed by. Like shield guys, I just screw up the combo every time. So I love to just one shot them when they show up. But yeah, it's really, really great. I'm loving it. What are you playing?
I want to talk about Spider-Man first.
Oh,
I agree with you. I think it does a great job of the like of, because lots of times in those games where you're like in the middle of like not a cutscene, but like somebody's talking to you while you're like playing the game, but you don't want to like trigger the next thing because you're like, oh, then I'm going to lose this conversation. But in that game, it remembers. And like you said, I'm just repeating what you said, but like it remembers where you were in that
yeah.
conversation. So you don't feel like, you never feel like, oh, I should just sit here and listen to this because otherwise I will miss it. It's like you can do whatever and then it'll come back. And the structure of the story missions is done so well that it makes sense that Peter would have a break to do other stuff right now, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
lots of times you get this like, okay, the world's gonna end. We're gonna drop you in the open world and like, okay, next mission's over here. World's ending in 10 minutes, but like next mission's over here. And you're like, cool, next world's ending in 10 minutes. I got a bunch of backpacks to go get. Or like I
Yeah.
feel like doing these other side things that are gonna take way more than 10 minutes. And the game's just like, okay, but the world's ending in 10 minutes, I promise. But and then it doesn't because but
Yeah,
like
it's a video game.
yeah, the story is paced such that, oh, of course Peter's got a couple hours to kill right now, right? And he even
Yeah.
says so, like you said. Also, something that is really interesting about that game is for most of the lines where this is applicable, they recorded them twice. Once if you're not swinging or doing stuff, and once if you are, and like he's like more strained when he's like if you're swinging and he's on talking to MJ on the phone or whatever, he's like, you can kind of hear it in his voice. He's like doing something while he's talking to her. And then once you like land on a roof, it seamlessly switches to the next line, and he'll be a little bit more normal, like he's not swinging. So like check that out next time you're playing. If you
That's something to notice. Good, because he does sound strange when he's like swinging. I've heard that, but I didn't realize they did it separately. I need to listen to I need to swing and then stop and then see the
yeah.
difference. Okay.
Yeah, I do that a lot because I just love that's like an attention to detail thing that's like just so cool. They just recorded every line twice. Like once pretend you're swinging while you're saying it, and once pretend you're not. You're just standing there or
Yeah,
walking around. Right?
I'm really enjoying it. I'm gonna keep playing it. It's also I heard it's like 25 hours long, and I'm like, that's
Yeah,
perfect. That's
sounds
a
about right.
perfect length for a game like this for me. So I'm just gonna kind of keep playing it as I go along. Might play some other stuff for the podcast, but I'm having a good time. So
Great. You got to play Miles Morales too. It's
yeah, I did.
even better.
I need to buy that as like an add-on, right? I think it's
It's
DLC.
just a separate game.
Yeah, so I'll just get that next time
Yeah.
too. But it's so fun. I love it. What have you been playing though, Tyler? I need to know.
I finished Persona 5 Tactica. I put a couple more hours into Super Mario Wonder. I'm almost done with it. That's like next on my list is to finish Super Mario Wonder. But I've had some other like just other hobby projects I've been working on at home that are not video games. So I've been, if anybody is interested, I've been like redoing my entire home network.
Yeah, we're all interested. Get into it, Tyler.
Yeah, well, I won't get into like details here, but
Let's make this video an hour longer. Here we go.
yeah, I've just been redoing a bunch of stuff there, and I have because I'm one of those weird people with like a server in my closet, and I've been just doing a bunch of stuff there. So I haven't spent as much time on video games, but I have been watching my partner play Spider-Man 2, which I've already played through, loved. But it's fun to see her play it again. So I get to see it again. So that's really nice.
And in Spider-Man 2, you're playing as Peter Parker and Miles Morales.
Yeah,
you go
switch
between, right?
You go between. Some story missions are Peter, some of them are Miles. Some of the side things are Miles, some of them are Peter, some of them you can do as either. You can switch at any time if you just feel like they have like slightly different abilities. So if you would rather play as Miles, you can just switch.
Nice.
So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Awesome.
But yeah, that's kind of it as far as what I've been playing. I really haven't been playing as much as I should be.
Hey, sometimes life gets in the way, and that's okay. Like I was going to play a lot this weekend, then some things changed with the weather around here, and stuff got crazy, so I haven't played Spider-Man at all, unfortunately. But that's okay. It just happens. So
that's right.
You're in no rush, everybody. You can play whatever you want.
It's video games, they don't matter.
It's supposed to be fun. Yeah,
we love them, but they don't matter.
Exactly.
And that's partially why I love them.
Next week, we might be in the same room.
That's true.
We might be in the same place together.
You're coming to Los Angeles.
I'm coming to Los Angeles.
Just doxed myself.
Yeah. Well, I feel like people knew you were in California and I was in Washington. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. Also, good. You don't know my name or what I look like.
So LA is huge. It's fine. All right. But anyway, so we might be doing that next week. I'm excited for it. So with that, though, things you can do to support us. We have an Instagram now. It's actually right down there.
At right Codex History Podcast. If you're watching the video, you can see it. If you're not,
that's why Tyler is a professional radio man right there, because he did it that way. And I just pointed at it. So it's at Codex History Podcast on Instagram. You can go to codexpodcast.net if you'd like. That's got everything on there. All our links, everything's there. So go check that out. If you want to send us an email, you can do that at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com or use the contact form on the site. But with that, though, I think we're done for the day, right?
I think that's it. Do you want to say goodbye to everybody?
Oh, goodbye, everybody.
I gotcha.
You got me. You switched it up on me.